As soon as Danny showed her in, I knew there was trouble with the steam. No, she wasn't problem, but she was causing me a lot of trouble that wasn't her fault. Just a sense I felt as I looked up and saw her at the door. "Hello, Mr. Carter?" she asked cautiously. I could tell she was married, as were most of my clients. "Nick Carter, ma'am." I nodded. "No, not like the punk kid singer, but I do occasionally get letters for him. One of the hazards of being a private investigator, having a prominent name and resides in Los Angeles. My father named me after his secret agent from a series of dime store espionage books. By Jove, publishing. We already had the last name, but my father named me Nick rather than Nicholas. Nick, go figure out." I rose as I spoke and shook her hand. "What can I do for you, madam? Your assistant mentioned that you could help me. I was referred by one of your prior customers." She grinned somewhat more, still nervous, however. "I see. Okay, Mrs. I am Janine Linder. My spouse, Dennis Linder, is a psychologist. I have cause to assume he is cheating on me, and I want proof before I file for divorce," she explained, handing me a photo of him. I raised an eyebrow as I looked at the picture. He appeared to be around 40, with a square jaw and dark hair that was graying at the temples. He had vivid green eyes that would undoubtedly appeal to the majority of women. "Okay, ma'am, you understand how this works?" I inquired, and she nodded. "Good. Give me 2 weeks tops and I'll have all the evidence you need. I charge $5,000 bucks. Is this acceptable to you?" "Yes, and half up front, correct?" she asked. "Do you have a separate account that your husband is unaware of or has access to in order to monitor your finances?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I set it up a few months ago so he wouldn't realize I had hired someone to track him. Your prior client said you were the finest." She grinned and handed me a cashier's check for $2,500. "Thank you, ma'am. Please give me an idea of how he's been acting suspicious. The more knowledge I have now, the easier it will be to follow his movements. Well, it's strange that I even noticed he was cheating. He spends every night with me, even weekends. However, when I call his office to schedule a lunch date, his phone is turned off," she said. "You could have a client run over during a session." I shrugged. Normally, you would be correct. But then there's the distance back home. He used to be all over me, but now he hardly touches me. Then I noticed the perfume scent on his clothing. At first I felt I was imagining things, but it wasn't my perfume, she explained. Some of his clients might have hugged him. "And how old is he?" I asked. "He's 44, she continued, and I nodded. "Well, I've heard that males around that age have lesser sex desires than they did before turning 40. Could this explain his emotional distance?" "You seem as if you believe it's just me being foolish," she responded fiercely. "No, ma'am. I'm simply trying to understand why you think he's cheating. I admit the perfume is a strong indicator, but it could simply be situational. I'll take this case, but I need to know everything you can think of. In addition to shutting off his phone, how is he acting suspiciously? It's always right before lunch on Mondays and Wednesdays. Other times he responds immediately, but on those days it travels directly to his voicemail." "Okay, I believe I got the picture. Tomorrow is Wednesday, therefore I will begin my research. Then I'll contact you as soon as I have anything definite for you." I nodded and rose from my chair, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. To be honest, I hope it is nothing, but I need some peace of mind about this." She grinned pleasantly. She truly was a knockout. And if I hadn't been married, I may have considered consoling her at any time. "Mrs. Linder, if I don't find anything after 2 weeks, you will not have to pay the remaining portion of my cost." I assured her it was my guarantee. "Thank you again, Mr. Carter," she added. "Ma'am, call me Nick. Mr. Carter was my father." I smiled and she smiled back. "Okay, Nick, I'm Janine. Ma'am is overly formal." "Okay, Janine, I will contact you as soon as I have something for you." "Danny, my assistant should have your information, so I'll collect your phone number from her." I showed her out and promised to contact her as soon as Janine left. Danny walked in and sat down in the comfortable chair in front of my desk. Daniela Velasquez has been my assistant for 6 years. I honestly would be lost without her, and I believe she knows it. She occasionally dates, but not frequently, and has the most stunning jet black hair, doe brown eyes, and a wonderful tan from her Mexican origin. She has the same build as J-Lo, but with more trash in the trunk and a much larger rack. Yeah, Danny would be in serious trouble if I hadn't married the woman of my dreams. I might be married, but I am not dead. I never touch. Well, except for hugs. "Okay, Chief, Here is what I have for you right now." She handed me the file she created online about our target. Danny is a pretty competent private investigator in her own right, and I was pleased to be the one who educated her. She's a quick learner, for sure. Dennis Linder is an extraordinary psychologist. As I looked at the file, a caution bell went out in my head. It seems that a former patient had filed a malpractice suit against him a few years ago, but the claim had been abruptly dismissed, with some stark, cliché explanation for why this was becoming increasingly fascinating. The former patient was female, and her spouse divorced her shortly after. Therefore, the malpractice claim was abandoned. That was the alarm bell. I got a horrible feeling about Dr. David Linder. My gut instincts are typically correct. Danny, investigate this jerk more thoroughly. Okay, yeah, I had a nasty feeling about him, I explained, and Danny laughed at my phraseology. Ha ha, yeah, I understand. I opened the door for that one. Thank you for not stepping through it. Anytime, boss man. She gave me a sweet wink before returning to her desk to continue working. Being searches for Dr. David, Daniela is worth twice her weight in gold, and I know I don't pay her enough despite paying her handsomely. We are more partners than bosses and assistants. We split. Each case splits 60-40, including retainer payments. Those retainer amounts, when summed up over numerous clients, total more than $200,000 per year after expenses are typically deducted. Danny effortlessly clears $110,000 out of $150,000, and this is after taxes. We share a lawyer who provides legal assistance, quid pro quo. We kind of work for him too. He goes by the name Wesley Quinton, and he specializes in divorce and other domestic matters. Then there's my wife, Samantha. Samantha Carter was previously known as Samantha Stern, so no relation to Colonel Carter from Stargate SG-1. She's more often known as Sammy. I met Sammy 7 years ago after quitting my job in Langley, Virginia, and returning to Los Angeles. I was an insurance investigator for that company. It was a decent job, but when one of my clients in Paris turned out to be a real jerk, I decided I'd had enough and used my investigative abilities back home. I had gathered enough money to start my own PI. They do business there. Nothing can be redacted anymore. Sammy is a complete knockout. She stands 5 feet, 8 inches tall, which equals my height when she wears her 4-inch heels. Fiery red hair and brilliant blue eyes, 34C minus 24 minus 36, measurements and legs that reach all the way to heaven. Her Angelina Jolie lips and beautiful grin may melt men's hearts and raise their erections within 50 feet. And she has everything organized in the appropriate locations. I initially met Sammy after completing my first case for my first client. He arranged a party to commemorate me finding and returning his belongings. I was his honored guest, and Sammy was a friend's daughter. She saw me, and I saw her. And it was as if the Earth's magnetic power had drawn us together. We spoke, danced, and spoke some more. I met her father, who is a nice guy, and he accepted my usual tale about being a former insurance investigator who decided to work in the private sector as a private investigator. I had prospects. And during the party, I was able to gain some new clients. That happened 7 years ago. After 6 months of dating and 6 months of living together, we married in a small ceremony attended by only her family and a few of our friends. My parents died in a car accident a few years ago when I was out of the country and left me there. They paid off the house in their will, me. I spent 3 years in the Army as an interrogator before being hired by the aforementioned corporation to examine potential insurance fraud. That's my tale, and I'll stick to it. I became a damn good investigator and realized I could make a lot of money as a private investigator. So I said goodbye to the company and returned home to Los Angeles. Obtaining a concealed carry license was difficult, but it was worthwhile to be able to carry my father's vintage Colt M 1911A1 revolver. The main advantage of 5 ACP ammo is that it almost always kills when fired accurately. That was something I'd always been adept at shooting. So I went out to where Danny was selecting bits and pieces of Dennis Linda's life and printing them for me. Hey, Danny, once you've finished your searches, you may call it a day. I'm going home. I smiled at her. Not a problem, Chief. She smiled at me with more than just professional regard. I hope Sammy knows what she has at home. I believe she does, sweetheart. You know you'll make some guy very happy if you ever settle down. I winked at her, flirting a little. Not Poppy. I lost my opportunity by a few months. She shrugged. I opened my mouth to ask her about it, but she had already returned to her computer monitor. "Okay, honey, go ahead and get the information folder. I'll be in first thing to pick it up." "Good night," I said as I approached the door. "Good night, boss man," she yelled out as I exited the office. I got in my car and drove home. Somewhere along the way, I began to think about Sammy and how she had been acting lately. Over the previous few months, she'd been rather distant, as if she had something on her mind that she wanted to share with me. But it always felt like something was holding her back. When I went home, I rectified the issue. I was ready to ask her about it, but she said I'd be an idiot if I didn't notice the writing on the wall. I had seen enough over the years. The story was always the same. Wife/husband was always emotionally aloof, whether before or after beginning an affair. So far, she has told me nothing. Whenever I asked her what was wrong or if she wanted to speak with me about something, why do ladies engage in the whole nothing routine? I will never know. I know some people who don't. However, the majority of them appear to believe that we are paid well enough to read minds. Sorry, ladies, we are not psychic. Sometimes you need to spell it out for us. With those thoughts in mind, I pulled onto our street and saw the Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo parked in front of my house. My cell phone rang as I pulled into our driveway. "Hello, baby," I replied when I saw my wife's name on the caller ID. "Hello, Nick. When will you be home? We have something to talk about with you," she said. Her voice sounded strange. "What are you saying, baby? Whose week are you referring to?" I had a sense that we included whoever drove the Jeep. "Just get home as quickly as possible." Okay, baby, I love you," I said. Okay. By this point, the warning bells in my head had evolved into a full-blown klaxon horn. I made sure my pocket recorder was in my pocket and ready to use. My cell phone was also capable of taking pictures. I set up my camera function just in case. I had no idea what had gotten into Sammy. She never stopped telling me she loved me, even recently. Now this. I was deep inhaling and practicing breathing exercises to relax. Once I got the Zen mood going, I got out and snapped a picture of the license plate on the Jeep. I had a very awful feeling about this. My gut was screaming at me, and I'd always listened to it. As soon as I walked in, I noticed them kissing. They had no idea I was so close, and I was able to capture a photo of them together with their lips sealed. I walked as calmly as possible, happily snapping away until they saw me. I pressed the record button on my pocket recorder. Where else? My pocket. Sammy responded, "You scared me, Nick. Can you explain when you're kissing a jerk in my house? Soon to be an ex-wife," I asked, raising an eyebrow as I shut my phone. "It's part of why I wanted you to come home, Nick," she explained. When I glanced at the jerk for the first time, I felt compelled to draw my weapon and punch a hole in his brain large enough to drive a Mack truck. Thrill. Dennis Linder. My current target was standing in my living room, towering above me. Okay, this was a tough situation. My client's spouse was now standing in my house, probably screwing my wife right there. I wanted nothing more than to shoot him dead. And her, for that matter. My heart was hurting, but my wrath kept the herd at away for the time being. However, if I was going to get paid, I had to keep my calm. Vengeance would arrive later. Payback is a witch and a half, and these two will feel every bit of it. "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" I asked with a lot more calm than I felt. "Mr. Carter, could I call you Nick?" was a whole asked. "No. Nick is only a nickname for me among my pals. You are not a friend. You're the jerk that cheated on my wife. Therefore, however, there is a definition. We'll never be buddies." "Got it?" I inquired with a snarl. "Yes, my name is Dr. Dennis Linder, and I'm here to treat your wife with sex therapy," he replied, identifying himself. "Okay. My sex treatment included kissing my wife at home?" I asked. Once more, the eyebrow was raised. "Indeed, it is doing so right now. I understand that this is incredibly irregular and may be difficult to swallow, but you must keep an eye on us as we do it," he said. God, this guy was as dumb as a box of bowling balls. He was playing exactly into my hands, consolidating not just my divorce proceedings, but also ensuring that his wife received everything except my alienation of affection and malpractice claims, which I had previously planned. I only gazed at him for a moment. "Dr. Dennis Linder, I heard you're quite talented at what you do." "Psychology, correct?" I inquired, hoping to win him over. "Yes, psychology. My approaches are occasionally controversial, but they always produce results, he preened. So, how long has my wife been seeing you for therapy? I questioned, choking back my own outburst, which was struggling to come out. It's been 2 months already, he confirmed. Sammy had made no mention of seeing a psychiatrist. I stared at her then. Sammy, if things were that horrible, why didn't you just tell me? I told you years ago while we were dating that if anything went wrong, you could come to me. Don't you remember that? I inquired, hoping to get through to her. I guess, she responded hesitantly. She had a puzzled expression on her face for a time. Sammy. Remember what we were talking about? Dr. Dipshit explained. Control, you must exert your control. I know you don't like being powerless, so take the initiative. Remember? His voice was unusual and almost captivating as he spoke to her, and I noticed her expression harden. You're correct, Dennis. I need to show him that I'm not a foolish woman who can be pushed around. She then stared at me. Sammy, what are you talking about? I almost yelled. When have I ever forced you to do anything? In the bedroom, we always make love, how you desire, never how I want. She nearly yelled at me. Okay, Sammy, you know what we said when we got married? That if we wanted to attempt anything new, we should talk about it and see how it goes. Remember that? I asked. All you had to do was ask, and we could at least discuss it. Her expression changed again to one of perplexity, but before Dr. Dick Nugget could say anything, her face hardened again. Nick, I have to do this. I need to examine what other tools are available to me. You can watch or don't watch, but I'm going to do it. She stated firmly, Sammy, do not do this, please. I genuinely wanted to say, please give me more evidence. But I refrained. I would get a lot more evidence. I need to Nick. This will not impact us. I still love you, she said with a little smile. I knew she was deceiving me then. I simply need something different. And only this once. Well, for the record, I don't want you to do this, and there will be consequences if you go along with it. I murmured, shaking my head, hoping to convey resignation. I'd unwillingly accept it. Mr. Carter, just let me do my job. Now, do you have a chair in the bedroom? He asked. He wanted to screw my wife in our marriage bed. Note to self, burn the bed and get a new one. We do? Yes. Wait, do you actually want me in there? I asked, horrified. It's necessary. Yes, Dr. Doom spoke. If you insisted, I snarled. Is there nothing else I can do to help my wife go back to normal? None, I'm afraid, he said with false earnestness. That would not have deceived a kindergartner. Well, I hope you do not expect me to engage in adultery, I stated pointedly. Mr. Carter, what your wife and I shall be doing is not adultery. I am simply assisting her in overcoming a mental hurdle and asserting herself more effectively in your relationship. You'll both be stronger when we're done. When he said that, he gave me a smarmy smirk, and it took all of my willpower not to force my pistol down his neck and empty the magazine into him. I don't agree to this. Just so you know, I will never agree to an act of adultery between you and my wife. And this is adultery, no matter how you cut it. I commented, noting that he was not wearing a wedding ring and had no tan line on his finger. As I already stated, Mr. Carter, this is therapy. Granted, it is contentious treatment, but it is not adultery. He smiled condescendingly this time. This was going to be okay after a little agony. Well, not in pain. My love for Sammy had died, and I was filled with numbness and righteous rage at what I was going to do to this a-hole once he finished banging my soon-to-be ex-wife. Since my wife agreed to all of this for me, she is damaged goods, and there is no point in fighting for her. The only thing I do now is compile all of the evidence and make sure they meet with karma soon. She is no longer worth jail time. I still don't agree with it. I shook my head as I followed them into the master bedroom. I secretly got out my iPhone and started filming as he undressed Sammy and made her lie on the bed. Soon he undressed as well, and neither of them looked at me as I sat in the chair to capture as much film as possible. Last opportunity, you two, I told you not to do this. This is being done without my permission. I stated that it should be recorded and that I did not consent to this act. The doctor saw my iPhone sticking out of my jacket pocket and didn't understand it was filming video. He smirked, as if you had a choice. Punk even pushed forward into Sammy, and that was it. That was everything I needed to see. That was all I needed to record. Janine's case was now sealed, and that was it. I stood up from my chair and strolled quietly to where Dr. Needle Dick was tearing into Samantha with joy and passion. I grabbed him by the hair and yanked his heart, pushing him backwards and away from her. I then struck a nerve between his neck and shoulder, and he folded like a lousy poker hand. He was still aware, but couldn't move. "Did you think I would do nothing?" "Doctor, my ex-wife never informed you what I did for a living, did she?" I could see the perplexity on his face. Sammy was looking at me now, as if I had developed a third eye. "I am a private detective, doctor. I now have evidence that you attempted to cut me with my wife. Now I have the evidence I need for infidelity, divorce. I have both video and audio. I also have documentation of affectional alienation and misconduct." I grin triumphantly, then reach for my belt and draw my sidearm. "See, you are a large man, doctor. I might lose to you in a straight fight. However, Colonel Sam Colt equalizes all men in the eyes of God. You should be able to move within a moment. Once you're dressed, get your 304 and leave." I said it quietly and evenly, which shocked the living daylights out of both of them. I heard Sammy gasp. "Good." I looked over to the woman who had just destroyed my heart. "Samantha, you should get dressed. Pack your crap and get out." "What?" she demanded. "You have heard me. I warned you there would be consequences if you went ahead with this, and the consequences are going to be terrible." I felt distant. My emotions didn't seem to be functioning properly. "These effects begin right now. You'll gather your belongings, load them into either your car or his SUV, and go. I'm going to contact my attorney and have him withdraw the divorce proceedings, then obtain a restraining order against you and the good doctor here. I'm just pleased we don't have children and that I won't be a father to your children." I shake my head. "Sammy, you have broken my heart. I hope everything was worth it for you." My voice cracked with the final sentence. "If this lover boy doesn't want anything to do with you, go remain with your family." Sammy's face showed a range of emotions as she processed what I had just told her. Her primary emotion seems to be confusion. "But Nick, are you no longer in love with me?" She spoke with wide-eyed, innocent shock. "Not after you allowed another man to take you into her marriage bed despite my protests." I yelled the last bit. "You have desecrated the vows we exchanged on our wedding day. Samantha, despite my protestations. You shit all over everything we ever owned." Yeah, I let her have it this time. I wanted her to be hurt. I wanted her to feel some of the pain in my heart. When I realized she didn't love me anymore, "Samantha, I can't believe I never knew you." I called her by her full name because I knew she disliked it, and she was aware that I only called her that when I was angry. "Samantha, do you recall the conversation we had shortly before we married? The one concerning faithfulness. Remember that one? The one where you stated that you would not accept cheating. The one where you declared you had no tolerance for cheating." "Okay, honey, this qualifies. I recognized the wisdom in your statements that day and adopted your viewpoint." Before she could respond, she drew a holster and appeared to be seriously considering jumping me. I moved away from him, keeping Sam Colt focused on him. I also made sure Samantha remained in my field of vision. "You are making a mistake, Mr. Carter. I am going to file charges," he snarled. "No error. I discovered you in bed with my wife and suspected she was being assaulted." Who will the cops believe? The respected private investigator who apprehended a criminal, or the man who maintains everything was consensual? Look at Samantha. Doctor, look at the agony on her face, the agony of being assaulted. It's a good thing I arrived when I did, isn't? Otherwise, you could have gotten away with it now. Perhaps I should contact the police to report this. His face turned pale as he hesitated, then reconsidered. Fine. No harm, no foul. He attempted to chuckle, but it fell flat. There are no charges. I observed that he had still not mentioned his wife. That was interesting. He probably thought he was keeping a secret from me, and I'd let him have that illusion for now. I had to prod him slightly, though. I'm sure the news stations will love this one, though. His wife was caught in bed at 11 p.m. telling her psychologist story. I shook my head, a disgusted expression on my face. That is when he blanched. "No, you cannot go public with this," he almost shouted. He was quickly dressing, ensuring that he had everything he had brought with him. "Please do not go public with this." He was now begging. I had him. "If you return all of the fees my soon-to-be ex-wife paid you, I might consider it. I am still pressing. Have and malpractice against you, however." I said, pushing him back into a corner. Done. He said, anything you want, with a panicked expression in his eyes. Anything I want, consider the possibilities, but no. I wanted him to, have no fear. I wanted him to experience fear before the inevitable despair and total devastation that his life was about to become. I was having a good time doing this, and I felt no guilt about screwing him over as he had screwed me over. The difference was that while he had screwed my wife, I was going to screw his life. No lube, sandpaper, condom. Once he was dressed, he ran from my bedroom and I heard the front door slam as he broke all land speed records, getting away from me and my home. I looked at Samantha and I could tell that she saw the malice in my eyes. Nick, we can get through this, she wheedled. Crying crocodile tears, please, baby, where was the baby when I got home, Samantha? Where was the love? That I sneered. Get dressed, get packed, and get out. I said, you have an hour. Since Dr. Dickhead doesn't want anything more to do with you, I suggest your folks. Samantha just looked at me in utter shock. She then started dressing and packing listlessly. I let her use all 4 of our suitcases, knowing that I was just going to buy new ones. Once I stepped into my home office and called the locksmith in the furniture store. I got the locksmith just as he was closing, but promised him a huge bonus to do a rush job on my locks. I then told the furniture store that I wanted a king size to replace our old queen size bed sheets, comforter, and the whole night. It was expensive, but worth it. He asked why I wanted the old bed thrown in my backyard, but I just told him that I wasn't paying him to ask questions. He picked up the tone in my voice and wisely shut his trap. Samantha was packed in 55 minutes, and in a magnanimous gesture, I helped her take her suitcases out to her car. In other words, I threw them on the driveway by her car's trunk. I then walked back into the house and slammed the door behind me. I called West and had him file for a restraining order with the night court judge. I named both Samantha and Dr. Dennis Linder in my complaint. I then had him draw up divorce papers, alienation of affection papers, and malpractice papers. An hour later, both the locksmith and the furniture guys were done, and I paid both with my credit card. I called the credit card company and canceled Samantha's cards. I then called the manager of my bank at home and had him cancel Samantha's debit card. I gave no explanations, but as the primary owner accounts, I felt it necessary. I no longer trusted her. For those who think I was going too far, go to hell. I poured myself a couple shots of Shivers. Now I'm usually a beer man, and I love beer beyond all other forms of drink. However, I needed something a bit stronger. So I poured my shots and set them as I thought about the train wreck that my marriage had turned into in such a short amount of time. At around 7 that night, I knew that I was about to lose it. I called Danny Ola, chief. Danny said, "Hey, yourself, Danny. I hate to call you after hours, but I'm going to need your help tonight." I said I was proud that the 2 shots of Shivers hadn't impaired my judgment or slurred my words. "What's wrong, boss man?" she asked. "I never could put anything over on her." "Well, it's complicated, and I don't want to tell you over the phone." "Just come to my house," I said, feeling the walls start to crumble in my mind. "Okay, Chief, I'll be right there." She ended the call before I could respond. God bless that girl. 10 minutes later, she was knocking on my door. I got up from where I'd been staring at the blank TV screen and went to answer it. As soon as I had the door open, Danny was throwing herself into my arms, hugging me tightly. She kicked the door shut behind her, then disengaged from our embrace long enough to throw the deadbolt. When she turned back, she grabbed my hand and pulled me back towards the couch. She sat me down and sat next to me. "Okay, where's Sammy?" she asked, already having some inkling of what was going on. After all, Sammy's car wasn't in the driveway, and I wasn't as distraught as I would have been if she died. I looked into the deep brown pools of Danny's eyes. "She's gone, probably to her parents' place. She was cheating on me, Danny." I could no longer hold my tears in check as she put her arms around me and held me as I ruined her blouse with my tears. I clung to her desperately, just needing the human contact when I'd finally let it all out. Danny pushed me back gently and looked into my eyes. "Nick, listen to me. Are you absolutely sure that Sammy was cheating on you?" Not trusting my voice. I instead pulled out my pocket recorder and hit play as I set it on the coffee table. I then opened my cell and brought up the video and hit play before handing it to her. Danny watched and listened with growing horror in her eyes as I went and got 2 beers from the fridge. By the time I got back, dark fire was blazing in her eyes and she had stopped both the recording and the video. I opened both arrogant jerk alleys and handed her one. Danny finally exploded after taking a swig of the bitter ale that which, well, Danny wasn't holding back. I cracked a wry smile at her words. Danny is loyal to a fault, and she's loyal to me. She took another long swig, then closed her eyes and breathed deeply several times. Nick, what are you planning? She asked as she laid her hand on mine. Because whatever it is I want in a nuclear strike on the doctor, I have reason to believe that maybe Samantha was brainwashed. If so, I want to get her the help she needs, I said, my voice hoarse from the crying. If there was even the slightest possibility that the a-hole had somehow brainwashed or coerced her, I wanted to find out how. But as for Dr. Dingleberry himself, I want him and all those around him to burn except for his wife, who you met earlier at the office. Turns out she was right about him cheating, and it was with my own wife. This is some shit, Nick. Danny shook her head in sympathy. But, okay, what's our first move? Recon, of course. I managed a tight smile as I compartmentalized my feelings for the moment. Now that I was on the job, it was easy to slip back into the professional persona. In a few hours, I'm going to pay his office a little visit. If you have a problem with breaking and entering, you don't have to come. I told you, I'm in, Chief. I'm in it to win it. And you know I don't back down. She smiled at me, then leaned forward and hugged me tight. I know Sammy Neck. I've known her almost as long as I've known you. I think she's been coerced, at the very least by that cabron. I think so too. But even then, I'm not so sure I want her back. She should all over us. She's known this tool for 2 months, and in that time he managed to convince her that our marriage was just another toilet bowl in which to take a shit. I said, still hugging her tight. God, she felt good. I pushed her back gently as my body started stirring and looked into her eyes. There was something there that I hadn't seen in Samantha's eyes in a long time. Lust. Pure, unbridled lust. And I was sorely tempted to kiss her right then and there. There were only 2 things stopping me. One, I was hoping that Samantha was a victim of brainwashing or coercion here, and that we could somehow work through all this. 2, even if she was more willing than she appeared, I wasn't going to stoop to her level and cheat with anyone, even Danny. Danny, I know what you're thinking, and you have no idea how tempting it is right now. But we have a job to do. I forced out the words through sheer iron willpower. I steeled my resolve and pressed onward. We'll swing by the office and pick up the van. Good call, boss, she said, curbing her own feelings. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see that she'd always had a bit of a crush on me. We'd flirt back and forth, but I thought she was okay with just flirting. But now that Sammy was out of the picture, for the moment at least, it was obvious she wanted more. Part of me was dying to give her what she wanted, and that part of me wanted it just as bad as she did. But, and here's the kicker, I was not going to do what my wife had done. No, my vengeance was going to be far more terrible if things won, as I feared. Also, I didn't want to hurt Danny, and I knew that if Sammy had been coerced or brainwashed by Dr. Dick, what? Danny would be hurt badly if or when I decided to work things out with Sammy. We left in her car and we picked up the van at the office. I grabbed the Comcast sign magnets out of the back and slapped them on the sides of the van. Urban camouflage. Got to love it. We drove to the offices of Dr. Dennis Linder at around 11 at night, and I went into the office building by logic. I was wearing a couple calfskin gloves that would keep my fingerprints off of anything. It allowed for enough freedom of movement that my dexterity wasn't impeded. Picking the locks was child's play, and once inside I made sure that my earbud was working properly so I could communicate with Danny. "Reading you loud and clear, Chief," she said. I had a small USB thumb drive on me that had 50 gigabytes of storage space on it. I was going to search his computer as well as his filing cabinets. I wanted to get a really good look at this guy's business, if he was doing this to my wife. I wondered how many other wives he'd done it to so far. The security system was child's play, as I called. The security company identified myself as Dr. Linder and told him that I had forgotten my passcode. It's amazing what the power of a good bluff can get you. I sounded authoritative, slightly pompous, and they bought it without even asking for a confirmation password. Amateurs. Danny giggled over my earpiece. I know, right? I chuckled quietly as I picked the lock to the doctor's office itself. I made a beeline for his computer, bringing it out of sleep mode. There were no family pictures on his desk. Well, he didn't love his wife very much. I shook my head that this a-hole, who had a hell of a hot woman at home, was stepping out with at least one of his patients password protected. Shit, shit, shit. Okay, don't panic. I reviewed what I knew about Dr. Linder. He was intelligent, if not very street smart. He was cunning when it came to seducing women on the ride over. Danny had given me the other dirt she dug up on Dr. Douchebag after I'd left. He was a serial womanizer. When we read between the lines of other patients of his who had filed malpractice or even pressed sexual harassment charges on him, then those charges were dropped without real cause, just some cliched misunderstanding bullshit when asked by the cops. I already hated the guy. Now I was ready to kill him slowly and with great enjoyment as he suffered the ultimate in physical and emotional pain. So with his womanizing tendencies in mind, I typed in Romeo as a possible password. Access denied, Casanova. Access denied, Lothario. Access granted. What a predictable a-hole. Finding the files that I needed wasn't difficult either. Wow, this son of a bitch was arrogant. I popped in the thumb drive and downloaded his whole special patient section, which damn near filled up the entire 50 gigs of space. I noted some of the names, including Samantha Carter, that creepy had video files of Sammy on here. Fine, whatever. I ejected the thumb drive and sent his computer back into sleep mode. Then I went rifling through his filing cabinets. I found Sammy's file, but nothing on it seemed to indicate what they had done. So he wasn't completely stupid as to list his sexual conquests in his paper files. Anything yet? Jeff? Danny asked over the earpiece. Lots, darling, I replied. Nothing paper. But I have about 45 gigs of videos that he's recorded with quite a few of his patients. Damn it. Okay, we're going to need to look those over when we get home, she said. I had a funny feeling about the way she said. We and when talking about our plans for the immediate future. When I left the office, I made sure that the doors were all locked and that there was no trace that I had ever been there. No security cameras, just the phone call that I'd made from a burner phone with an untraceable number. Voice ID could cause a problem if someone cares enough. But I wasn't going to worry about it right then. It was well after 1 a.m. When we got back to my place, we got inside after I put the garage door down, and before I could say anything, Danny blindsided me. I'm staying the night with you, Nick. She said it firmly. No room for argument. Okay. I shrugged. You can have the guest room. No, Nick. I'm staying in your room in your new bed. And I'm not taking no for an answer. You shouldn't be alone tonight. Even if we don't have sex in there, it was out in the open. The invisible elephant had been revealed. Danny, I trust you. Shit. You're about the only woman on earth that I trust right now. I'm asking you to. Please don't break my marriage vows tonight, okay? I asked. I promise. She said with a smile, then kissed my cheek. We'll go over the footage in the morning. I brought my laptop so we can split the videos and get them done twice as fast. Sounds like a plan, sweetie, I said as I headed in to get a shower. I felt filthy, and not just because I hadn't had a shower since before I went to work the previous morning. As I stood under the water, my mental compartment opened, and all the feelings of betrayal came rushing back. I was sobbing against the wall of the shower when I heard the shower door slid open. The next thing I knew, I was being held by a wet and naked female. Danny held me close, stroking my back as she washed me. I would have probably taken her without a second thought, something that I at least would regret in the morning. She tried us both off, then guided me into my bedroom. She didn't even bother with pajamas or a nightshirt. She put me in bed, covered me with the sheet, and then went around and climbed in the other side. I normally fell asleep shortly after my eyes closed. I was completely exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I awoke the next morning with a smile on my face. Sammy spooned me during the night, her body pressing into my back. Shit, I shouted, then jumped off the bed like it was on fire. It was real. It wasn't just a dream. Sammy really had cheated on me and left me. Danny got up and hugged me close. God, she was putting on the full court press with me. I decided to nip it in the butt. Danny, listen to me, okay? I croaked at her reluctant nod. I continued. Danny, I'm sorry for that just now. I thought yesterday was just a really nightmare. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of you in that way sometimes. But I love my wife for who she used to be before that scumbag got his hands on her. But I promise you one thing right now. If Samantha went along with this all willingly, I'm going to divorce her when that's done. If you still want me, I'm more than willing to try with you. Okay. And that's one reason I fell in love with you. She sighed in resignation. You're the most honorable man I've ever met. Her voice was equal parts, admiration and exasperation. Thanks, sweetie. I kissed her cheek as I released her nubile body. I got a good look at her without the tears in my eyes, and she literally took my breath away. She's tan all over with no tan lines. Dear Lord, I was being tempted like I'd never been tempted before, like what you see. Poppy. She gave me a seductive grin. I managed. Hey, all the blood was in my small head at that point. My brain was oxygen deprived. I had swollen to mammoth proportions compared to normal. Danny looked down and smiled, but didn't reach for me. When this is over, and if you aren't with Sammy again, I'm going to screw your brains out for the rest of our lives. Poppy, she whispered, which made my tool jump even more. Danny, if I'm not with Sammy when the dust settles, I'll let you, I whispered back. Then I got dressed and Danny left the room, but I heard the sizzle of the frying pan out in the kitchen. I smiled at that, then got dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, put on my belt with Colt and holster and went out to join her. I didn't usually wear my pistol at home, but I wasn't going to take any chances with a possibly sociopathic psychologist out there. I noticed that Danny was also wearing her piece, a Lady Smith & Wesson, a 9mm. She'd also gotten a concealed carry permit shortly after I hired her. Smells good, I said, with the first big, genuine smile I'd had since this whole mess started. Thanks, Nick. She shot me a cute grin, then went back to turning the omelet she was making. I smelled bacon in there, as well as cheese and salsa. She really knew her stuff. She was dressed in one of my old t-shirts and the jeans she'd worn last night. Her blouse was still on the floor in the bedroom. Danny, I know this is going to be tough on both of us, I said as I sat down on a bar stool at the kitchen counter. She looked at me and raised her eyebrow. Boss, I didn't sign on to be coddled. You made it clear from day one that I would most likely be needed on some cases. And with my background in criminal justice, you knew you could count on me. That hasn't and won't ever change. I couldn't help falling in love with you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to shy away from this one. This case is personal to me too, since Sammy is my friend. That pendejo doctor is going to get a rude awakening by the time we're done with him. Every word she said was true. She'd been a detective for 2 years in the LAPD, but had been drummed out for beating a sexual assault suspect half to death. She'd been lucky to avoid serious charges, but as the son of a witch had been guilty, they didn't want the bad publicity of filing charges on her. She'd been given a nice little severance package to keep her mouth shut about the circumstances of her termination, but she'd been upfront about it with me when I first interviewed her. It was one reason I'd given her the job. I wanted someone who wasn't afraid to get his or her hands dirty. Danny was definitely not afraid to get her hands dirty. Sometimes I just forgot that about her. You're correct. I nodded. Danny, I need to tell you something about me that not even Sammy knows. I took a deep breath. I knew I could trust Danny. She trusted me, and I had verified the veracity of who she was and why she'd been fired. What do you mean? She asked, a confused look on her face. Danny, I never worked for an insurance company. I worked for the company as a covert operative there. My name is Nick Carter, and I used to be a spy, and that sounds like a really bad impression of the opening of Burn Notice. Danny just looked at me, then plated our omelets and brought them to the counter along with mugs of coffee. God bless Danny. I sort of figured that it was either that or you had a criminal record someplace. She shrugged. You're always looking around. You like someone might be watching you. You don't show it much, but I've spotted it over the years we've been together. You know a lot about bugs and how to tap a phone in record time. And then there's your lock-picking ability, which rates right up there with the best burglars in the business. I laughed outright. She really was a shit-hot detective. You're good, I said, raising my mug of coffee to her before taking a sip. I'm just right, and you make the best damn coffee on earth. Just so you know, I said it was her turn to laugh. Thanks, boss, she said. I'm not just a pretty face and a hot body, you know. She winked. I understand. If you were just those things, I wouldn't have hired you. I shrugged. She leaned over and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Thank you, Nick. No matter how this goes, thank you for everything. She smiled. Hey, you act like you're going to be leaving. Not going to happen. I smirked at her. You'll be working with me until we're both old and gray. She just regarded me for a moment. You know, you're right. She grinned. I couldn't leave you if I got a job paying $1 million a day. Good. I said, because I can't afford that. And you're the best damn assistant I could ever hope for. I'm glad you finally acknowledged that, boss. Now eat your food before I smack you. She stuck her tongue out at me, so I stuck mine out back. Then I really dug in, and her omelet was amazingly good. God, that girl can cook. There are two schools of thought on the way to a man's heart, and all that stuff they teach girls. One is through his stomach, and the other is through his willy. For me, it's both. Granted, Sammy is a tornado, and bed was my tornado in bed, and she could cook reasonably well. But then you knew there was a book coming. Danny's skill in the kitchen. Easily put Sammy to shame. If she had sex half as good as she cooks, I was seriously considering trading up. Even if Sammy had been brainwashed by Dr. Dick Fungus, that might sound cold, but she had succumbed fairly easily without discussing anything with me at all. I couldn't believe that she would go behind my back to see a quack shrink like Linda and not discuss anything with me. That itself was unlike her. She used to tell me everything. Early on in our relationship, it had only been in the past couple of months since starting her therapy that she had shut me out pretty much completely. Once breakfast was done, I helped Danny with the dishes. Once done, she turned, and before I could react, slipped her arms around my neck and pulled my face to hers. She kissed me passionately, and for a few seconds I returned her kiss just as Holly. Our tongues dueled for dominance, and then I backed off, blushing like a schoolboy. I'm sorry, Nick, she said quietly. No, Danny, I don't think either one of us is sorry for that. I chuckled. Damn, I wish I'd met you before my wife. So do I, she said sadly. Shit. Someone was going to end up getting hurt. No matter how this turned out, I really didn't want it to be either of them. If Sammy had been coerced or brainwashed, we had to watch those videos. Come on, let's go watch those vids and see if they can shine some light on Sammy's mental state. I said we went into the den where I kept my home office, and I downloaded half of the videos to her laptop. I started where I needed to start, with Sammy. The first interview was pretty basic, just a getting-to-know-you session. Doctor. Dick Sucker was jotting stuff down in his notepad while asking Sammy questions about her life. He asked about her husband, me, and about any other family. She told him about her parents and about how much she loved us all. I studied his face, and a sly little smile played across his lips at that. He then asked a few more innocuous questions and then told her not to speak of this to anyone, as it could adversely affect their future therapy sessions. That son of a witch, he had set out to seduce her from the start, and since she had followed his instructions on keeping me in the dark and I had no clue what was going on, I couldn't have done a damn thing to stop it. He had abused her trust in him as a medical professional. Malpractice suit, check. The second vid was more questions, more personal questions this time. He asked her about our sex life. She answered truthfully, and I couldn't help feeling a swell of pride when she admitted that I gave her multiple climax each time we had sex. He just jotted stuff in his infernal notepad about each answer she gave. He asked some more personal questions that she seemed reluctant to answer, but he reassured her that nobody else would ever know about what she said. She answered truthfully again. It ended with him reiterating the need to keep these sessions confidential. She agreed. I checked the dates on the videos. There were 16 videos of Sammy's sessions, and that corresponded to his Monday and Wednesday appointments. I groaned as I put my face in my hands. The third vid was difficult to watch, but once again, he didn't brainwash her or coerce her in any way other than professional ethics, as he called it. She told him about her fantasies, and a lot of them I already knew about and had helped her fulfill. Some, however, were things she'd never told me about before. She wanted to tie me up. She wanted to dominate me in the bedroom. Jesus. She'd never said anything to me about those. Once again, after she was done telling him what he wanted to know, he stressed the need for secrecy and sent her on her way. The fourth vid was when he started his insidious seduction in full. He asked her to describe her domination fantasies in detail. So she launched into graphic descriptions of what she wanted to do to me, and I listened raptly to each thing, she said. She got through 2 of them before time was up. Once again, the secrecy agreement, and she was on her way. The 5th and 6th videos were very similar to the 4th. The 7th and 8th videos were more fantasies of hers where she would screw me. I was beginning to see why she wouldn't have told me about these fantasies. I just shook my head as she told him personal things about herself that she had never shared with me. Her own husband. He then suggested having 2 men at once to her and showed her a video clip of a woman in a sandwich with one guy from front and the other in back. When she saw that the wheels in her brain started turning, and she said she would think about that one. That was his kicker. And I saw his sly grin of triumph at the end of the video. He once again urged her to keep their sessions confident, chill, and then let her go. The rest of the videos were mostly him talking to her about her fantasies thus far. He enumerated each fantasy and pointed to how she was actually a dominant personality that had been subservient all her life and had grown to accept it. First, she was subservient to her family. Then she was subservient to me. He built up her self-worth to the point of egotism. By the end of the 14 video and had convinced her to have 2 men, including me, as part of her therapy. I noticed that starting in that one, he didn't urge her to keep quiet, knowing she wouldn't tell anyone, including me. It was the 15th video where he first scooted her just a little under a week and a half ago. He told her that he would be the second man if she wanted him to be. She said she didn't know. She looked like she struggled with the decision for a solid 15 minutes, as he gently urged towards where he wanted her mind to be. She finally gave in, and he laid down on his desk and told her to dominate him. She did. The 16th vid was the last she in, and before he could say anything, she kissed him passionately and then screwed him hard. She said that she didn't just want a 2-on-1, she wanted to cut me with him. That was the clincher right there. It showed me that she was beyond saving. She made a conscious decision to cut me instead of the original plan of having sex with her along with him. This time, she told him to keep it quiet and she would call him with the right day and time. I stopped the video and looked up to see Danny looking at me with tears in her eyes, and a disgusted look on her face probably mirrored my own disgust. The guy was a serial seducer, a real Lothario that made sense with his password on the computer. At least I'm hitting this son of a witch with a legal warhead so big he's going to wish he'd never been born, I vowed in a calm voice before. God and Danny, I'm with you on that one. Boss, she said as she sat on the edge of my desk, it seems that the longer video sets are more challenging. If it makes you feel any better, all the others are fewer than Sammy's. She held out the longest, apparently. She shrugged and gave me a hopeful smile. I sort of figure that since all the ones left on here are shorter than hers, but you just confirmed it. This guy makes Machiavelli look like a good guy. I shake my head. But as far as coercion or brainwashing, he's not guilty on those counts. He just convinces them to do it, and there won't be any harm in it. Yeah, I noticed that too. From what I can tell, he's never involved the husband before in their little games. But then the husband finds out somehow and divorces his wife. All the ones I've checked so far have ended up in divorce. She listed the names of the women in their ex-husband's contact, couple of the exes, and find out how they found out about Dr. Nicholas seducing their wives. I need to talk to Janine. I shooed her out of the room, then pulled out my cell and called Janine's phone. Hello? Janine, it's Nick, I said in a tight voice. Nick, thank you for calling. Are you going to start your investigation today? She asked. I've completed it. Actually, you were more correct than you know. Is there any way you can come to my house either tonight or tomorrow? There are some things we need to discuss of a personal as professional nature. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hitting on you. But this case has hit a bit close to home for me, I explained. Care to elaborate on that, Nick? She inquired. Not over the phone, ma'am. Either tonight or tomorrow morning would be best. My assistant Danny will be here with us since she has some info to share with you as well, I told her. What's your address? I gave her my address and she said she would be here in 10 minutes. 11 minutes later, I heard a car in the driveway. I checked, and she'd driven a nice Jaguar SJ6. I opened the door for her, and Danny brought her coffee while I went and got mine and Danny's laptops. I set both of them up on the coffee table, and Danny and I sat on either side of Janine as I started to explain things. Janine, Dennis is a serial cheater who uses his position of professional authority and trust to seduce women and cut their husbands behind their backs. I said, From what we've seen so far, he only goes after married women. There are no single women in these videos." Danny added, "Now, each video series chronicles a seduction. He gains their trust, then talks about fantasies or problems in their marriages. He uses this information to seduce them and make them do exactly what he wants them to do. He doesn't coerce or brainwash his victims, yet he's a serial abuser. As you can see," I said, showing her all the series of videos. She gasped at how many there were. How the hell could he have kept this a secret? She yelled, her face beet red with wrath. "Janine, keep calm, please." "There's more," I murmured, swallowing the lump in my throat. "More." She looked at me like I had just fallen from another planet. "Yes, ma'am." As I remarked on the phone, this one touched pretty close to home for me. You see, my wife was his newest conquest. I showed her the name Samantha Carter on the video series I highlighted. "My God, I'm really sorry, Neck." Janine held me firmly. "He's going to pay for this. Be sure about that. He's going to pay through the goddamn bleeding as I'm going to give him for this shit. Janine, how much is your spouse worth monetarily? I will be pursuing alienation of affection and malpractice against him." I said, "Don't worry. I'll introduce you to the best darn divorce attorney in California. West will take good care of you and get you as much as feasible." Janine laughed. "Honey, Dennis is worth about $250 million, counting his properties around the world. He has a profitable. His books are blockbusters, and he's been on Dr. Phil as a guest multiple times. The majority of his money was made from his books, though. Okay, what I recommend is we hit him with a blitzkrieg. We hit him hard and fast, but it's going to take maybe a few days to set up." "Do you trust us?" I asked her, indicating me and Danny. "Yes," she said. "You've lost a lot to Nick. I'm sorry for that. I should have seen what a snake he was before this. I understand. Come by my office in the morning and I'll introduce you to Wes. He's my attorney and will be handling my divorce from Samantha as well as my litigation against your spouse. But by Friday, we hope to have several additional ex-husbands on board to file claims against him for malpractice and alienation of affection as well." I lay out my strategy to her, and she was nodding and smiling by the time I was done. "I can go along with that. The challenge will be to continue acting normally around him for 2 more days. I might claim feminine difficulties or simply travel out of town to see my mother. He would most likely buy it because she is old." Janine nodded. "True. He's trained regardless of mood or behavior. My advice is to contact your mother. Tell her what's going on and let her cover for you. Meanwhile, I have a guest room with a queen-sized bed and a garage that can accommodate 2 extra automobiles." I smiled. So far, only my car and Danny's car were inside. I handed her a garage door remote, and she graciously accepted it. She went home and packed. Danny also headed home to pack. She packed a week's worth of clothes and returned half an hour later. I chuckled as she carried her belongings into my room and placed them in Sammy's old dresser. The girl is determined. I will offer her that. The next morning, Janine returned just as I was getting out of bed after another wonderful night's sleep with Danny at my side. She was now wearing an enormous t-shirt of mine and panties to sleep in, which I appreciated. I wore boxers, pajama trousers, and a t-shirt. Danny was in the shower when I heard the garage door open. Janine looked beautiful and gave me a compassionate embrace and kiss on the cheek when I went to see her as soon as she walked in. She had a tiny luggage containing a couple of changes of clothes. She also brought me bank statements for Danny's accounts, and I was astounded by how much he had in liquid assets. Janine informed us that she was ready to proceed after Danny had prepared breakfast for us all, and we had finished another delicious meal. I told her that we would be allowed to relocate after all ex-husbands and wives were informed of the latest developments. We had 11 ex-husbands to call, and we instructed them to contact their ex-wives and advise them of what was going on. We planned to sue Dr. Dump Truck separately for malpractice and alienation of affection, and they were really welcome to join us. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the husbands were eager to exact their revenge on a whole, and the vast majority of the ex-wives were eager to get started. I wasn't about to involve Sammy, though. Not long after seeing the previous video, I arrived at Wes's office with 9 of the 11 ex-husbands we were able to reach, as well as all 9 ex-wives as I was ex-husband number 12. I'd be in on it. To save time, West created identical copies of A and malpractice documents and just changed the names based on who was in line. He was like a kid in a candy store, with well over 175 million liquid assets from Dr. Dumb and about 100 million properties around the world that would most likely have to be liquidated to pay for the malpractice, divorce, and alienation of affection claims. Sure, a class action would have been simpler overall, but we were trying for shock value here. I wanted Dr. Dennis the Menace lender to realize his world was going to crumble around him like the walls of Jericho. Janine waited with Danny and me at the end of the line, as Wes cheerfully assisted his new throng of clients in making an a-hole's life miserable while making a lot of money. Yes, he is a close friend of mine, but he is still an attorney. When he was finished printing up malpractice, he sent documentation to his new customers and sent them on their way, promising to have it brought to Dr. Dennis at work bright and early Monday morning with plenty of witnesses. Yes, it was. It is my turn now, Janine. I filed for divorce from Samantha, and Janine filed for divorce from her soon-to-be very poor ex-husband. Wes was immediately smitten with Janine, and it appeared that their attraction was mutual. I arranged with Wes for each client's items to be delivered by a separate process server at the same time. Wes, Janine, and Danny all joined me in smiling like skeletons at that one. He was about to be overrun on Monday morning, and Danny and I, along with Janine, were going to have front row seats. As a bonus, Wes provided each of us with a restraining order against Dr. Dump at no cost, his clientele. He knew how rich he'd be once the fallout from this massive nuclear strike had subsided. Then it was time for Phase 2. Phase 2 entailed media and law enforcement saturation. I utilized Sammy's films to blot out her face, change her voice to a computer blip, and remove any mention of her or my identities, all with a new ED program I purchased. I edited together portions from various films to demonstrate how Dr. Dennis Linder has a pattern of enticing women away from happy marriages or marriages with the potential to be happy again following his therapy, but he saw the need to devastate their marriages for his own sick ego. I utilize excerpts from the other women's recordings to demonstrate how Linda persuaded them into turning against their spouses. I knew the media would eat this up. The FBI would investigate him for criminal malpractice because he was defrauding guys and having sex with their spouses. The California Board of Psychology was also going to be interested in this. I set up a dummy email account for this purpose and used proxy servers to avoid detection. Phase 2 began Monday morning, immediately after the process servers completed their tasks and the last process server left. I handed Janine the popcorn bucket, and she was nibbling away as Danny Boy dashed out the front of his office, gazing around furiously. He saw me standing next to his soon-to-be ex and Danny. I held up my cell phone, pressed the send button for bulk email transmission, and began Phase 2. We got into my car and drove away. Dr. Dick yelled at us incoherently, threatening to kill us all. The last time I saw him, he was kneeling in the parking lot, holding a stack of paperwork and bawling his eyes out. My revenge was not half finished. Phase 3 included a meeting with Samantha, which she agreed to. She had been residing with her parents and was about to find out that she wouldn't be able to stay there anymore unless she was extremely lucky. We met in an extremely public spot. Starbucks has to adore it. "I'm here. Does this imply you want to talk?" she inquired hopefully as she sat across from me. "In reality, I actually have something to tell you," I replied with a smile. "Samantha, I would have been willing to forgive you for almost anything if you had been manipulated or brainwashed by the entire situation. I am not kidding. But after 16 hours of you agreeing with everything he said, despite your complaints, you eventually suggested cooking me to play out your domination dream, something I will never forgive or forget." I shook my head slowly. "Sammy, I would have done just about anything for you. I loved you more than you realize. Loved. As in past tense. I would have given my life for you until I witnessed the ultimate betrayal of everything we meant to each other. I apologize, Samantha, but you have been served." I slid the divorce paperwork across her. Given her shocked reaction to the paperwork, I believe you will find it fair. You are kidding. I was not in my right mind. Baby, please, you need to believe me. She panicked, so I let the second boot drop. If I were you, I would plan something to tell your folks. Samantha, Something tells me they just received an anonymous email revealing what kind of daughter they raised. I stood and walked away, leaving her in startled stillness. I had asked Janine out, and she had accepted. I attest for his integrity as she inquired about it. I said, "He's a divorce lawyer." I shrugged. "Then I'll only need to keep an eye on him." She grinned. "But really, he's a good guy. I wouldn't work with him unless he was," I said, using up on my pal. The next day, Wes called to say Sammy and her lawyer were there and wanted to talk. I agreed and drove over with Danny as a moral support. "Okay, I am here," I replied as I sat down opposite Sammy and her lawyer, who resembled Gloria Allred, and Danny joined me and Wes. "Hello, Mr. Carter. My name is Gina Ulbrich. I'm going to represent your wife in this. From what she has told me, you have completely devastated her. This is why I am taking her case pro gratis. I'll start by stating that these terms are unacceptable." She ended her original tirade. Middlebrook. "Let me emphasize that I have enough evidence to persuade any judge and jury in the world to my point of view. It depicts my soon-to-be ex. They are conspiring with her lover to fuck me. It was her proposal. For the record, I am not into that lifestyle and will never be. Given these circumstances, I feel my proposal is more than adequate." I finished sitting back. "And where is the evidence?" "Right," Junior asked West. God bless him as he began watching the DVD he had created of Samantha's last 2 sessions with the good doctor. He also had the recording from my pocket recorder and the iPhone footage on DVD. The film showed them arranging it all, with her playing the bewildered and helpless victim who only wanted to explore her sexuality and Dr. Linder guiding her on it. Then I switched to my personal recorder when I entered and discovered them together. Then there's the iPhone footage of them having sex on our marriage bed, followed by me ripping him off of her and throwing him to the floor. "I have the rest if you need it." West responded with a shit-eating smile. "Simply utter the word and I will create copies of everything for you." Gloria Jr. seems dissatisfied with her surroundings. At that point, she had a look at the proposal I had made to Westropp. It was actually very fair, given what she'd put me through. She'd collect $75,000 and have her automobile paid off. She would have her items picked up at my discretion, and I would pay for her apartment for a year, no children, so no child support or alimony, even though I had refused. I wasn't going to pay her till she married again. But the place was at least decent. After speaking with Samantha, Gloria's younger clone stared at me. "We will take it, Mr. Carter. That was a good call." I smiled. We all signed on the dotted line. Jean notarized it, and it would be presented to a judge in 30 days. Those 30 days went by so slowly that I wanted to pull my hair out every day. Danny and I would make out like teenagers, but I couldn't fully commit to her. You wouldn't believe how much I wanted to. But I was being stubborn. Some could say dumb. By the end, I was starting to think I was foolish. Finally, the court day arrived. We hadn't had any cases since the Lender case, so it was frustrating to wait for the hours to pass before we could finally be together. When the judge slammed the gavel, I drew Danny into my arms and kissed her until our toes curled. Sammy approached us as we were breaking up. "I apologize, Nick. For whatever it's worth, I ruined the best thing I'd ever had." She had tears in her eyes when she glanced at Danny. "Danny, please look after him, and don't be as dumb as I was. Sammy, I've been in love with Nick since I first saw him. I kept my distance because he loved you with everything he had. I kept my distance because you were also a buddy. You are both my friends. But after what you did to him, I couldn't stand by any longer. I am not sorry either. I adore this man, and I pledge to take care of him for the rest of our lives." Danny surprised me with that one too, but she genuinely astonished Sammy and held her tightly. Danny had moved in with me for 30 days. Wait, it had been something to do while we waited for either my idiocy to fail or the divorce to be finalized. So when we returned home from court that day, I took off my previous wedding ring and tossed it on the coffee table before taking up Danny and bringing her to our bedroom. She laughed as I flung her onto the bed and stripped her down in record time. She was also stripping, which took very little time. I had sex with her as if she were made for it. It took 2.5 years for the aftermath of my nuclear strike on Dr. Dennis Linder to subside, and many individuals suffered the consequences in one way or another. Several couples who had been separated by the asshole's acts reconciled and remarried after getting compensation in their alienation, affection, and malpractice lawsuits. Okay, great for them. Samantha contacted me shortly after all of the malpractice and alienation of affection charges were filed, when the trial against the doctor differed. Samantha currently lives in Vegas and is a dominatrix. With Linda's psyche having opened up, this appears to be perfectly up her alley. Her parents are still not speaking with her. Thanks to my surgical strike against her by handing them a video of her and her lover conspiring against me, she brought it on herself once Janine divorced him, of which she received well over half. And all of the criminal accusations fell on old Danny boy like a ton of bricks. He pleaded out to the best of his ability, but he lost his license and was forced to declare bankruptcy once all of the claims were resolved. That did not prevent all those he had mistreated from receiving their just recompense. However, it just delayed it somewhat. Someone who will remain anonymous paid the good doctor a visit one night before his criminal trial began. Whoever that person was, they beat Dr. Douchebag so hard that he had to spend a few weeks in the hospital. He had 2 fractured knees, 2 broken arms, and 2 ruptured balls. As for how I know all this, so ask me no questions and I will tell you no falsehoods. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go clean my old metal baseball bat. Wes and Janine dated for 6 months and got along really well. They married and I served as best man. And Danny is the maid of honor. West earned enough from the lawsuits to retire and they intend to spend their golden years together. Dr. Douchebag's counsel was unable to have the video proof of how a Scorpio seduced all those ladies suppressed. Therefore, the trial was pretty much over. He was convicted. Everything counts. Danny Boy spent only 2 days in prison before the guards discovered him swinging in his cell. He appears to have fallen so hard and so swiftly that he committed suicide, rather than confront the train disaster that his life had become. Good. One less burden for society. The a-hole, who had damaged so many lives, was literally at the end of his rope, if you ask me, with his demise. And since he never revised his will, Janine was only too eager to utilize her sizable inheritance to settle with people whose lives her now-deceased ex-husband had devastated. Danny and I profited well from my lawsuits, $50 million. Overall, $50 million. I murmured this as I placed my finger on the side of my mouth. We too have retired to raise our 2 children. Our son Nicholas is already a handful and is going to enter preschool next year after Danny insisted on giving him a complete name, which I promptly agreed to. Isabel, our daughter, is the most adorable infant I've ever seen. We're happy now. That's the case. My latest case was a mixed bag for me, but everything worked out fine in the end. Thank you for taking time to hear today's story. If you loved the story, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a tale to share regarding your own or someone else's circumstance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.